Welcome to Southern Songs and Stories. I'm your host, Joe Kendrick, and today we bring you our episode on Ketch Secor of Old Crow Medicine Show. Ketch was on this podcast 2 years ago in the episode titled Painting a Portrait of 23 Years with Ketch Secor of Old Crow Medicine Show, which is based on our conversation at MerleFest that year. Old Crow Medicine Show's famous song Wagon Wheel is the subject of an episode in this series from a few years before that on the podcast titled Wagon Wheel, Anatomy of a Hit, and I'm attaching that episode to the end of this new conversation with Ketch Secor for everyone who missed it the first time or who might just want to hear it again. Southern Songs and Stories is a proud part of the lineup at both Public Radio WNCW and Osiris Media, the leading storyteller in music. Follow Southern Songs and Stories wherever you follow podcasts, with more at southernsongsandstories.com. You can engage with us on social media. Southern Songs and Stories is on Facebook at Southern Songs and Stories, on Instagram at South Stories, and my YouTube channel is Joe Kendrick NC. On August 9th, 2024, I traveled with WNCW intern and rising Carleton College senior Will Prim to the PNC Arena in Charlotte, North Carolina, just ahead of Ketch Secor's show that night supporting Hank Williams Jr. Old Crow Medicine Show is headlining the Earl Scruggs Music Festival in Tryon, North Carolina, over Labor Day weekend 2024. You'll hear Will ask some questions later in this interview, which begins here with me asking Ketch about his upcoming show at the Earl Scruggs Fest.
Well, this is our first time ever being invited to do this, and we're really honored that they asked us to come down. This is Shelby is a cool town with a lot of interesting things happening. You know, when you do what I've been doing, particularly in North Carolina of all places, like I came to North Carolina in 1996, and I took a job in an old-time string band. That's what that song, Rock Me Mama Like a Wagon Wheel, is all about. It's about me getting this job and thinking, oh, it's going to be better when I get to North Carolina. And so for the past, however long that's been, that's like 30 years, I've really paid attention to North Carolina and how and what a musical capital it is. And the only reason I got dragged over to Nashville is because somebody called me after they saw us in North Wilkesboro and said, you really need to come here. And because all I had in my mind was, screw that guitar, going to get me a fiddle, I'm going to be like Elvis, and I'm going to rule North Carolina. That was my plan. I mean, how about that? I should have told my high school advisor, that's what I'm going for, because that's what I really set out to do. Anyway, I digress, but anytime we get a chance to break new ground for the band in North Carolina, it resonates with that initial wish. It harkens back to my younger self, where a couple of years ago we played for the first time in Pilot Mountain, and I just love Pilot Mountain. I love mixing it up with North Carolinians. I always have. I love the music. Always feels like it's making a hometown return from, like a hero coming back from some war, and it really feels that way. I started talking with that metaphor in the beginning of this spiel for WNCW, and I'm going to return to it. When you sign up to give your life to the muses and make music for people all around the country, particularly when it's traditional music, when it's got fiddles and clawhammer banjo and a ton of harmonicas just shining all the way across the country, when you have that kind of reverberation in mind and you bring it on back to Old Carolina, it's the ripest apple. I just want to bite into it, Shelby. See you soon.
Yeah, I was thinking about Old Crow Medicine Show, and Earl Scruggs Fest is so based and infused with collaboration as a driving force. And so I was curious, who are some of your favorite onstage collaborators that you've gotten to work with in the past, or if there's any plans for the future or people you want to work with moving forward.
Well, I was always a real natural collaborator, like even when I was a teenager and we were playing open mic night, I'd pull drunks in from the crowd. I'd pull them up on the stage. What do you got? I was always jamming with some weirdo, man, let me tell you. But then when I got good, or whatever, good enough, I started getting around people where I could take that experience and really, mix it up for the common good. And that's probably around the time that when I was about 23 and met Gillian and David. And Gil and Dave really helped me kind of crystallize that feeling of, wow, this is the gregarious act, this music making. Being out on the road with them was like summer camp. We'd go out with bluegrass bands, and we loved their kinship and had such an affinity for them, but we didn't mix it up with them. We didn't play a big encore at the end. We weren't all jamming in the hallway. So getting out with Dave and Gil, we got to do all those things, and then that just snowballed into a kind of attitude that I took in our post Dave and Gil years, in which we played with everybody, anybody that was in. If you're the opener, you're in the band. Pull a kid off the street. Pull a buck dancer that you saw out in front of a joint. Somebody that was recommended online that plays the zither. Oh, you're in the band. Somebody with a blue ribbon for auto harp. Come on up, honey. I just always been that way, and I really like to do it that way because I feel like there's a torch you pass of that ideal when a younger generation does it. So like when we mixed it up that way with the Lumineers or with Sturgill or with other acts that have gone on to do much bigger things, I like to think that we planted in them a spirit of that collaboration so that they'll go do it and they'll pull in the buck dancers from, Fort Wayne too.
Arthur Grimes.
Yeah, we love Arthur Grimes. I hope you're listening, Arthur Grimes. Love you, buddy. He's, if you don't know Arthur Grimes, he is probably my most favorite dancer. He comes from the Junaluska community of Boone, North Carolina, and he's been dancing his whole life. He loves country music, and our lives intersected out in front of Boone Drug one day when we were busking, and he was dancing, and Doc Watson chanced by, and we've been friends ever since.
Thinking about how Old Crow Medicine Show has had these kind of at least two sides of Old Crow Medicine Show, maybe not the only two sides, but social conscience is very much present, all throughout your career with lyrics and subject matter of your songs, but also like one of the most hedonistic bands, really, with subject matter and the shows that you put on. So I wonder if you've ever thought about, comparing yourselves or maybe having any other artists or bands that have been in that mold that you've drawn from or that you can look to as contemporaries.
That's a great question, and I appreciate that because I think you're so right. We do have a little Saturday night and Sunday morning all mixed up in that show, and I think that that's what country music at its best really purports to do. Johnny Cash is high on pills, and then he's telling you about the promised land in the next song. So we certainly had a avatar to watch to perform that way. Tonight we're here opening up for Hank Jr. in Charlotte, and it's going to be All My Rowdy Friends Are Coming Over Tonight, and then it's going to be I Saw the Light. So country music does this better than most, and that's what I love so much about country music is that duality. But for me, in terms of having an actual role model in that sort of, hedonistic salvation orientation. When I was a kid, I lived in a small town in Virginia, in the western part of the state, that was kind of country, kind of middle of the road, and but it was the 80s, so things were kind of backwards, and we had sidewalk preachers. And the sidewalk preachers were fascinating to me. Like, they were called to be public. You know, they would actually get up on like a milk crate in the middle of the court square, and they would testify. And sometimes I see people doing some semblance of that now. I'm also the kind of guy that if you call me and you're a telemarketer, I'll talk your ear off, man. So, how's the weather over there? What's going on? How about the election? What are you thinking? You know, so anyway, I love the sidewalk preachers, because to me, that's the feeling. You know, it's because the thing about these preachers, they look sinful. They do not look like somebody that you would want your sister hanging out with. And they smell drunk. And yet they're the ones called, and they're screaming, and that's the glory? Wow. I want that kind of glory.
I think only in the South. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that is quintessentially Southern right there. The court square preacher.
Yeah. Yeah, he might as well be Elvis. I mean, he's got the moves. He shakes it. And he looks like he's not going to, like Rodney says, ain't living long like that.
It takes one drop to lift these many waters. It takes one drop to roll these many waters away. It takes one drop to lift these many waters, for we turn still waters to rolling waves. And it takes one hand to help pull up your brother, and it takes one kind word to turn a stranger to a friend, and it takes one ear to listen to each other, just to hear what heart beating rhythm again. It takes one stone to move these many mountains. It takes one spark to light the darkest hour in today. It takes one road to reach a new tomorrow.
Wrapping up their latest album, Jubilee, that is a bit of Old Crow Medicine Show with Mavis Staples, guesting on One Drop here on Southern Songs and Stories. It's almost a gospel song, I'd say. One of the unique aspects of our time with Ketch Secor was my fellow interviewer, Will Prim. I can't say enough good things about Will, and everyone at WNCW truly enjoyed having him intern here. When we went to Charlotte to interview Ketch, it was towards the end of his internship. Towards the beginning, we had hopped over to Shelby, North Carolina for my interview with Larry and Joe, which immediately precedes this episode, where Will contributed notes and questions. This time, he got to jump right in and ask Ketch some questions himself, including this one.
I was curious what your thoughts are, because I remember listening back to past interviews and the interview you did with WNCW a couple years ago. You talked about the idea of kind of a new South, or this kind of like, you know, pairing the ideas of social consciousness and kind of molding that into progressiveness. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that a couple years later, and what you think how the South looks moving into that idea of a new South, or what your thoughts are on that issue nowadays.
Well, thanks for asking that thoughtful question. I expect when we talked about this last, it was probably somewhere, you know, after the George Floyd riots, and you know, before the next presidential line, and the feeling of one of racial inequity continues, of course, because you know, here we are down south, and it's America, and yet I'm more optimistic than ever that you know, I've seen, like I wrote an op-ed piece one time a couple years ago about seeing the rebel flag come down in South Carolina, and it's called the Big Red FU. I liked seeing it. I liked bearing witness to it, and I thought it was important to write about it because the change that I see happening with my children and their generation exemplifies a kind of absolution to, I think, the crimes of what it has meant, you know, the criminal element of American history, which I don't think is going to be that's a wayward path, and I don't think that's how things are going to be in the future. But having been there, I didn't get to dip my feet into the waters there when Dr. King gave his powerful message in Washington in 1963. I didn't get to hear the voice of Sister Rosetta Tharpe that so harkens to a better time. But I did get to see them lower that flag, and it came down real slow, and it had a guard all around it that was mostly African American men in uniform, and I watched them take down the Confederate flag, and it felt like, man, things are moving.
Ketch, last time I talked to you, you were somewhat recently fascinated with music from Equatorial Africa and Texas border music, and I wonder if there are any new rabbit holes or what your new musical discoveries have been.
Wow, I needed this call a couple of years ago. When you guys must have reached out to me and we had this interview, I really needed to talk, because now this, in reflection, like I went through a divorce and I was really, really unhappy, and music was just saving my ass all the time. So hearing you guys ask these past couple questions, I can see we must have hit right after the pandemic or right before it or something. I am always in a discovery of music. Right now, I think my biggest discovery is understanding Molly Tuttle and her music and her style, and writing these songs that have been, we wrote our last album together, and there's some of the best songs that I ever wrote. So I'm really in a kind of a songwriting creation type of space right now, and largely with her in collaboration. I think she's probably the best musician I've ever heard in my life. Just like kind of like Dwight Gooden, just like an incredibly good pitcher, a very, very thoughtful mind for the game, and calculating. So we've been writing a bunch of great songs, and I'm sure you can hear them on WNCW. Y'all could do a whole day of those songs and ask me about them, because everything that we've written together and the things we're writing now for her, for subsequent music for her, really is some of the best stuff I've ever been involved with.
What does that songwriting process look like?
It's just like any old collaboration songwriting. I think of the metaphor with songcraft as the way that cats copulate. It's really uncomfortable, and I don't think anybody likes it, and they screamy. It's no fun. I hate writing songs. Writing songs is painful, arduous. I don't like nothing about it. I don't look forward to it. It's a pain in the ass. But then you get through that feeling and you're like, oh my God, this is great. So you just keep on doing it. But there's nothing I like to do. But I've been doing it a long time, and it was difficult back then. And sometimes you get a flow to it, and it's like, oh, maybe you'll get an easy one out every couple hundred. But mostly it's just so painstaking. When you think about how we are all editors, everybody here is editing their lives as they go by, and a lot of that are ruminations about what you did wrong today. Oh man, I really should have X'd out that part where I was disgruntled to a stranger on the street, or the way that I treated that person at the grocery store. Oh, I really wish or I didn't stand up for myself when I encountered that bully on the playground, or much more smaller vanities of just the ebbs and flows of our lives. We're constantly editing out the things that we know could result in the great improvement of our work, and that work being our lives. So think about how uncomfortable it is when you make mistakes and you're like, I got to do that better next time. I mean, that's what the distillation of that is music writing. So it's it's a little bit therapy. It's a little bit how would I do it with my best self. Every song's supposed to be your best self version of it. With three verses and a chorus. I mean,
But what would have become of Ketch Secor if you hadn't have taken up the mantle of writing songs? I mean, where would have that have landed you?
Probably that sidewalk preacher bit, Just step right up on that milk crate, testify, make me enough money to get me a pint, do it all over again. The nice thing about being a busker is that, you know what, I don't really play a lot of the songs that I write when and I don't play on the street corner much anymore, but me and Molly, we busked in Key West one time a couple years ago, and we had a day off and we were busking. It was great. And nobody knew that we were famous in some light or whatever. Nobody knew that they could have paid, a lot more than $1 to see our show. They just walk by, buskers. You just think they're like one step up from groveling. It's a begging routine. But the thing about when you busk, I don't really find that the songs that I play as a busker are anything. They're just quick little vignettes, you just hit them hard. You don't even have to say real words, and I make up a lot of songs on the spot. People want to hear songs about how the weather is right now as they're walking by you. Listen to them sirens blaring, everybody's going that way, look at what are they looking at. You can just sort of get after them, get under their skin. There goes a guy with a really weird hat on. Look at that girl, she's, that's how you get a tip.
Yeah. This is great. Ketch Secor on WNCW, Old Crow Medicine Show. So good to catch up with you again. What did we leave out? What else do you might want to add?
Well, this is the 25th anniversary of Old Crow, and we're just really honored to have had this long go round. And we only could do it because people cared enough to come out and see us and to, crank up our music in their cars and trucks and play our songs around the campfire the way they have done, especially in Western North Carolina of all places. So we just really appreciate our Western North Carolinian audience and the folks that sometimes get a bootleg signal out of Newport, Tennessee and Cocke County. I know y'all listen too, and especially all the rednecks who listen and don't want their buds to know about it, but they love the bluegrass. So music brings us together, and in times of division like these, we have to find commonality. It's our duty. And me and Earl Scruggs might not have voted for the same guy, but that guy's a saint. And if you can see a saint embodied across the aisle, that's all you got to do. I'm opening up for Hank Jr. tonight. No one's going to call Hank Jr. a saint, whatever side you're on. But me and Hank, we're going to make music together and entertain this crowd together. And we don't think the same thing about this or that at all. And yet we're in this together. And if you can get to that point in your life, in your community, well, that's going to, I don't look to DC to fix this. I'm going to look to Spindale, North Carolina. What do you got? I'm going to look to Cocke County, Tennessee. Let's get some skin in the game. Let's talk to our neighbors. Let's be close with one another. So I don't know. It's been a challenging time and a lot of room to be bummed out about this stuff. But I just got to keep going head on. I play the fiddle for a living, and it draws people together. If you're a Pied Piper, you might as well lead them to someplace better than this.
Thank you, Ketch. Great to talk to you.
All right, y'all. Thanks.
Okay, so there's our time with Ketch Secor of Old Crow Medicine Show from summer 2024. Don't go away, because we jump back in time to 2019 in a moment to revisit our podcast on Old Crow Medicine Show's Wagon Wheel. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us, and we hope you can help us again by spreading awareness of what we're doing. It's as easy as telling a friend and following this podcast on your platform of choice, both of which are quick, easy, and free. From there, it takes just a moment to give us a top rating, and where it's an option, a review. It makes a great difference, because the more top reviews and ratings we get, the more visible we become to everyone on those platforms, which means that more people just like you connect with artists like Old Crow Medicine Show. This series is a part of the lineup of both Public Radio WNCW and Osiris Media, with all the Osiris shows available at osirispod.com. You can also hear new episodes on Bluegrass Planet Radio at bluegrassplanetradio.com. Thanks to Will Prim for being a part of this episode. Thanks also to Jacqueline Anthony for producing the radio adaptations of this series on Public Radio WNCW, where we worked with Joshua Ming, who wrote and performed our theme songs. I'm your host and producer, Joe Kendrick, and this is Southern Songs and Stories, the music of the South and the artists who make it. Do you love a good song? Man, I love a good song. From all over the spectrum, from Big Star's 13 to Herbie Hancock's Cantaloupe Island to Neutral Milk Hotel's Holland 1945. There are songs that I will go back to time and again. I love even the songs that I only enjoy for a while before burning out on them. They're part of the soundtrack too. You know, Soundgarden is no longer a band I'll play on the car stereo on road trips now, but that takes nothing away from how enjoyable it was to blast Louder Than Love in my Fiero back in 1990. And all along the scale, I like to keep listening to these songs, whether they be great, good, or sometimes even just okay. Or at least I like to think I will still play them even when I'm only going to just remember that they existed, kind of like I remember 1990 me existed. There's still a relationship there, even if the only interaction it gets is the occasional Christmas card. But the song we are talking about in this episode of Southern Songs and Stories is one that is almost impossible to have a Christmas card relationship with. It is a song that is in many ways larger than the band that made it. Over nearly 2 decades since it was first put on record, it has become practically inescapable. You would have almost literally had to have lived under a rock to miss this tune, and there's also almost zero chance that you do not have an opinion of it. This song has had such a long run and has had such success in its original version, even more so in one of its covers, that your opinion of it likely has changed over that span of time. Your relationship with it may well have gone from falling in love to honeymoon to separation and divorce. For a lot of people, it went pretty much just like that. Welcome to Southern Songs and Stories, and this is our episode on the song Wagon Wheel. Time to begin at the beginning. That's Arthur Big Boy Crudup with a bit of his 1944 recording Rock Me Mama, which gets our wagon wheel journey rolling. Bob Dylan credited Crudup for the phrase Rock Me Mama in the first version of Wagon Wheel, which was never released but was an outtake from his soundtrack to the film Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid in 1973. Fun fact, this was the record which gave us Dylan's last #1 hit, Knockin' on Heaven's Door. Dylan sang just the chorus of Wagon Wheel, and that made its way into a bootleg, which future Old Crow Medicine Show member Critter Fuqua picked up on a family trip to London. Later, his homesick schoolmate and future bandmate Ketch Secor started working on fleshing it out at school in New Hampshire, and it was in the Old Crow Medicine Show set list from day one when they got started back in 1998. Beginning with Arthur Big Boy Crudup may not be the real beginning of this song, though, since he likely drew from this Big Bill Broonzy song, Rockin' Chair Blues, released in 1940.
chair. You know I'm young and tender, gal, and you got to handle Big Bill with care, baby. Just rock me, darling. Now, rock me, darling. Now, rock me, baby, one time before you go. Rock me, baby, rock me all night long. Rock me, baby, rock me all night long. I want you to rock me like my back ain't got no bone.
Flash forward another decade and we get to Lil Son Jackson's Rockin' and Rollin', with the phrase, roll me baby like you roll a wagon wheel. It is unknown to me whether this has any direct connection to Wagon Wheel or if it is coincidental, but there are more songs that we can connect here, like the 1939 Curtis Jones song, Roll Me Mama, that includes the lines, now roll me over just like I'm a wagon wheel. Very likely, wagon wheel metaphors and similes were just one of the many tools in any given songwriter's toolbox. And like practically every song everywhere, the song was born out of the same shared consciousness and heritage that artists mine for musical gems all the time.
So rock me, mama, like a wagon wheel. Rock me, mama, any way you feel. Hey, mama, rock me. Rock me, mama, like the wind and the rain. Rock me, mama, like a southbound train. Hey, mama, rock me.
Songs tell tales. They capture myths. But how often does the song itself resemble a fairy tale? If there was a yellow brick road for songs, then Wagon Wheel walked all the way down. We already have larger-than-life characters like Big Bill Broonzy and Bob Dylan on screen, and that's just the beginning of the movie. We are already not in Kansas anymore, or in the case of Old Crow Medicine Show, we're not in Boone, North Carolina anymore. That's where Old Crow got an early, really big break, catching the ear of Doc Watson while busking in town. The band would busk practically anywhere, and this was foundational to their sound and their success. Several years before they self-released their first EP, back in 1998, they were touring Canada, busking at farmers markets and any place that people would gather to hear them. Melissa Block interviewed Ketch Secor in 2006 on NPR's All Things Considered, just after Old Crow Medicine Show released their second album, Big Iron World. And in their conversation about that trip north of the border, Ketch explained that when busking, you have to be better than the billboards. You have to be better than where people want to go. You have to create an instant draw so that people will stop and listen. Then it's like a glue that rolls out into the street and everyone's trapped.
Walking due south out of Roanoke, I caught a trucker out of Philly, had a nice long talk. But he's headed west from the Cumberland Gap to Johnson City, Tennessee. And I gotta get a move on before the sun. I hear my baby calling my name, and I know that she's the only one. And if I die in Raleigh, at least I will die free. So rock me, mama, like a wagon wheel. Rock me, mama, any way you feel. Hey, mama, rock me. Rock me, mama, like the wind and the rain. Rock me, mama, like a southbound train. Hey, mama, rock me.
Can you break down Wagon Wheel for me? There's a good reason why it became what it is. Part of it was just luck and whatever else goes into making a song ubiquitous, but the song itself, the lyrics, the song structure is really easy to play and latch on to.
Sure. I don't know if there's any particular element. Like, to me, it's one of those songs where I think it has a lot of memorable lines. I mean, I don't know if it's not exactly like a story song where there's like a beginning and a middle end and there's like a happy ending, or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it is, if any particular element it doesn't have one of those pesky bridges. I love a good bridge, and Wagon Wheel does not have one, which, makes it all the more memorable. I mean, if you can do the chorus and do the verses, I mean, you're home. There's a million zillion rootsy kind of country songs, G, C, and D, chords. There's no shortage of those. So what is it? What is the intangible factor contained within the Wagon Wheel formula? I do not know.
That was Dave Brewer talking to me in his home in Boone, North Carolina, following a bit of Old Crow Medicine Show's 2006 performance of Wagon Wheel at the Theater of the Living Arts in Philadelphia. Dave is a member of many bands and often plays drums in shows with Teleco, who we profiled here on Southern Songs and Stories in 2018. Most of his direct experience with Wagon Wheel was with his band Possum Jenkins, who got started around the same time that Old Crow Medicine Show released their first album in 2004. Dave got to witness the song's progress from day one, and it soon became a crowd favorite at Possum Jenkins' shows, such a favorite that it started to overshadow a lot of the band's own material. In time, they played Wagon Wheel only begrudgingly, and eventually they refused to play it at all. They were certainly not alone. Here's Jerry McNeely.
When I was in the band Velvet Truck Stop with a group of guys here from Western North Carolina, we played in a little dive bar in Folly Beach. It was across the street from the Holiday Inn, HOLLYDAYN, called the Rock and Roll Roadhouse. And the Roadhouse had a little knee wall that hung above the stage. It was like hanging from the ceiling. And on the back side, it said, "You will start promptly at 10 p.m. or you will not be paid." And then number 2 was no Wagon Wheel, no free bird, or you will not be paid.
Signs like that are still posted in bars and music venues all over the country, with variations like, quote, "blank number of days since the last Wagon Wheel," end quote. There was once even a website version, stopplayingwagonwheel.com. The band's old hometown of Asheville, North Carolina once proposed that buskers be banned from playing it. When I talked about making this episode on Twitter, I got some strong responses like, quote, "I hate it so much, I just absolutely hate it," end quote. There was some Wagon Wheel love too, to be sure, but you get my point. This is a third rail kind of song for a lot of people.
Hey, where did we go?
You know that song, Van Morrison's Brown-Eyed Girl. If you're like me, you don't want to hear that song anymore. Wagon Wheel has achieved Brown-Eyed Girl level exposure, and detractors are everywhere now. But how do you get to this point?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a great song. It has beautiful lyrics, and it's meant to be inclusive. It's meant to be a song that brings together an entire room of people, no matter how big or small that room is. But at the same time, it has reverberated to the point where it's deafening to those who initially loved it. It's sad because there are so many songs that I can't listen to anymore because they're so overplayed. You listen to top 40 rock and roll, classic rock radio, all those songs are played in rotation every day. There's dozens of bands that they set into the computer, and there's no variety. I can't listen to Aerosmith anymore. I can't listen to Ozzy Osbourne anymore. I can't listen to AC/DC anymore. And that's because it's so overplayed to the point of annoyance, which is no fault to the artist. They created a beautiful song. They created a beautiful sound. And then it just gets amplified physically and emotionally into not only pop culture but our daily lives, to the point where we tune out, turn off the stereo, and possibly walk around the corner to go listen to something new.
There was a point when there was a backlash on Wagon Wheel. What was it for you?
I can't say there was like one discernible moment, but I think it just was this kind of groundswell of, it's kind of like if you just start noticing something, I mean, to a point where you can't ignore it any longer. Every time you get in someone's car, every time you go to a party, every time you go to the bar, every time you go anywhere, it's like, this song is following me and I have to stop it. And that is a drag, you know. It's like it's like somebody giving you cake at every meal or something, you know. It's just like, but it's so good. How could you not have another piece of cake? And it's like, well, I don't know, man. I just don't want cake anymore. I just can't whatever it is about this thing, I just can't, you know, that level of overexposure that I'm done with it. Having worked in a bar for a long time and having heard songs on a jukebox just ad nauseum, you know, I've tried. I mean, I legitimately try to just take a deep breath and hear what it is that the next person who is going to discover this song and love it, you know, because I mean, there's somebody who's never heard Wagon Wheel and they're going to hear it tomorrow for the first time, and it's going to be a revelation to them, and they're going to love it for all the reasons that we all love it. And then they might end up hating it for all the reasons that we all hate it.
I mean, it's a great song, but it's like everything else, becomes so played and covered that, you know, it almost loses, it's almost like novelty. It's like American Pie right now, you know, or something, which is a great song too. And I always turn it up. And look, whenever I hear Wagon Wheel, I always turn it up on the radio. The original, you know, I feel like it's just covered way too much. But the original, the Old Crow Medicine Show, is a great version, and that I never deny. I always turn it up when it comes on, and because it's a great song.
Yes, it is, and that's, you know, you have to have a great song to get to being overplayed. So there you have it.
That's right. That's just the way it goes.
I'm guessing, especially around here, it's pretty polarizing.
Yeah, and one of the takeaways that I've had is that a lot of people from here might not have caught on to especially the secondary popularity of the song, because we were there from the beginning and we remember it in that context. But for a whole other section of the musical world, they only got the supersaturated Wagon Wheel effect.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I think that's what is interesting to me coming from here. You know, if you had some kind of heat map for the initial success of Old Crow Medicine Show's Wagon Wheel, I bet Asheville, Western North Carolina is going to be pretty red. This kind of feels like almost the epicenter for that.
Exactly. It is ground zero for Wagon Wheel here in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Yeah, and in a sense, I didn't get sick of it like any of these other people have gotten sick of it. I kept it at a healthy distance, I guess, somewhere along the line. It was still a good song. It didn't turn me off that it became so popular. But for a lot of people, that they just cannot go back there. They just cannot stand it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I'm in the boat with you. You know, I think it's a great song. And you know, you knew that immediately just from hearing it. Personally, I'm a big fan of melody, and I get hooked by that really easily. And obviously, that song has it. And I think we knew from the beginning that song is something special. And again, it felt like something, you know, coming from Old Crow, a band that's doing really well in our area, that it would resonate with people. And I think the subject matter, the name-checking places familiar to us here in the South is helpful to it. You know, my thought was, obviously, this is a great song, not necessarily my bag. I didn't play it at my wedding. I've never sang it at karaoke. But I know over time it's taken on this whole other thing where it's like up there with Don't Stop Believin', you know, where people kind of either love it or hate it.
That's Zach Altheimer, music industry professional specializing in marketing for bands and festivals, following singer-songwriters Reed Fail and Dave Brewer, and Garrett Woodward, arts and entertainment editor at Smoky Mountain News, also music editor for Smoky Mountain Living, and contributing writer for Rolling Stone. So it's almost a spectator sport to compare Wagon Wheel to songs like Freebird now. But it's way more than just any platinum seller, which begat an even bigger platinum seller. We explore some songs that have more in common with Wagon Wheel than its sales figures, coming up on Southern Songs and Stories.
Hey, this is David Childers. You're listening to Southern Songs and Stories, where you can enjoy my band and my story on our podcast in this series documenting the music of the South and the artists who make it. Southern Songs and Stories is available on podcast platforms everywhere and at southernsongandstories.com. Would you take a moment to leave, hopefully, a good rating of this podcast and leave a comment if you want to? That's one of the quickest ways to help us reach more fans just like you. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support.
Running from the cold up in New England, I was born to be a fiddler in an old-time string band. My baby plays the guitar, I pick a banjo now.
Garrett, I thought to ask you about any parallels, any sort of songs that are analogous to Wagon Wheel. It's very hard to find anything that's even close because there's some songs in history that have been covered, that have been hits, bigger hits than the cover, or the original rather. There are songs that had kind of a slow ascendancy that became bigger later. There are just so very few of all of those categories, but Wagon Wheel is not really either. It was pretty much a hit anyway, the original version. It was also a slow burn. It also increased in popularity and noteworthiness over time, and then was later covered with even greater success by a couple of artists. So I think I boiled it down to the comparison being Gentle on My Mind as being something that was, successful enough at first when John Hartford wrote it, but then was covered multiple times with great success. Do you have any examples? What do you think about this?
Well, that song has so many different layers of why we not only cover it, but also why it's also such a hot button topic for a lot of people. I think personally with Wagon Wheel itself, the reason a lot of people get annoyed by it is, especially musicians, is that I think it's the one song that people that don't listen to country or Americana, like real country music or Americana or folk music, that's the one song they know. It's almost like I always felt Catcher in the Rye is the favorite book of people who don't read books,
I think for Darius Rucker to pick up on that, or whomever it was, his handlers, whatever, whoever, raised their hand and said, you should do this one. To me, that was a no-brainer. I think going back to, kind of when we first heard Wagon Wheel from Old Crow, it was 2004, 2005. It was a special song right away. You knew that. And so then when I heard Darius do it, that was a no-brainer. That makes perfect sense. Obviously, that's going to take it to the stratosphere. What is interesting is, as a lot of us know, the mainstream country that's coming out of Nashville or wherever, a lot of those songs are written by committee or people other than the artist. That's a whole other, much more than a cottage industry, but it's a whole other business. in Nashville, where songs get written a lot of times specifically for an artist or shopped around to a few different ones. They hadn't necessarily seen the light of day once they end up on whomever's record. This one had seen the light of day and had a lot of success. I mean, again, I think that's what makes the story really interesting, is that song was hugely integral into Old Crow's success, certainly around here, but even nationally. It had reach. And so, that I think is really interesting, that it has had these two lives that you don't normally get with a country song or co-writes or whatever. But I totally agree with you that there are, those folks out there who get really turned off by a mainstream country artist taking this song from, kind of these punky old time kids. It was, and thinking like this was our song years and years ago, and now these bastardized it or whatever and put it out there. But for me, I mean, a great song is a great song, and the cream rises to the top. And it's obvious to me that a song like Wagon Wheel would do great in Darius Rucker's hands or whomever else. It's almost like it was just destined to happen.
A bit of Wagon Wheel by Old Crow Medicine Show from their performance at DelFest in 2018, following conversations with Zach Altheimer and Garrett Woodward. I went to archive.org to find that audio posted by Jamie Burks. Old Crow seems to have a pretty healthy relationship with the song, keeping it in their set lists for all these years later, and switching up instrumentation and tempo with this example. Wagon Wheel, unlike some songs that are massive hits at the beginning of an artist's career, does not fall into the albatross category for Old Crow Medicine Show. I'm not entirely sure about what relationship Nathan Carter or Darius Rucker have with it now, but my bet is that they still embrace it too. Sometimes, though, a young artist or a band has a big hit with a song that does not jive with them in some way later on. Like it does not sound like what they want to play for the rest of their careers, or it may steal all the attention away from their more current songs, and so on. And while that's not the case with Wagon Wheel for Old Crow, the relationship that all the bands who covered the song has with it is not always so healthy. Here's Garrett Woodward, followed by Dave Brewer.
I would assume with Old Crow Medicine Show that they were probably initially bowled over by the fact of how big it actually became. But when you actually look at where it is right now in terms of the level of popularity, it's almost gone over to the point where it's looked at as taboo, where it's almost with the same annoyance of like a teeny bopper kind of thing, where these people that are hard Scrabble musicians that go from town to town and a lot of times live out of their van and eat, truck stop food and are scrounging every dollar they have. And then they go into a bar to play their songs after being on the road for sometimes 10 to 15 hours, been away from home for a couple months, not making any money. To have someone all of a sudden halfway through your set yell out Wagon Wheel is almost like this nails on a chalkboard for people. They almost look at it as lessening to their own art.
Despite the fact that we were a band in Boone and Old Crow had, been discovered in town, but, we didn't really have any tangible connection to them or anything else. It was just a song. But fairly soon after we started playing the song, the reaction to it was kind of hard to ignore. I just thought, well, people really sure do like this song. Yep, they sure do. That's good. Next. But it got to a point, I think, eventually where it was hard to ignore just how much, how passionate people were about hearing that song, We were obliged to play it for a while.
It became a kind of a problem of its own at a point. It became a little bit too big for its own good.
I mean...
Or for your good.
If for our good, I guess. I mean... It was hard not to notice that particular song was receiving as much or more attention than any of the songs that we had written, were quite proud of, et cetera, et cetera. And, you don't want to get painted into a corner in terms of, what you have to play and you don't have to play. But there were definitely people who, man, they wanted to hear that song bad.
When you think about it, the song Wagon Wheel has done something that very few other songs in history have done. It has reached millions and millions of people over its history of 2 decades. It's impossible to forget, and it's also impossible not to have an opinion on it, or at least not once you've heard it 20 or 30 times. It polarizes people, but it also unites them in a common experience. If there's ever a lull in conversation you're having, you could always say something about Wagon Wheel, and people would have an opinion on it. And also, along its long journey, it continues to introduce people to acoustic roots music. Along with the Oh Brother, Where Art Thou soundtrack, Wagon Wheel has probably sold more banjos and fiddles than anything since Flattened Scruggs went to #1 on the charts with the Ballad of Jed Clampett.
All them North Country winters keep forgetting me. I lost my money playing poker, so I had to wipe and leave, but I ain't turning back to live that old life no more. So rock me, mama, like a wagon wheel. Rock me, mama, any way you feel. Hey, mama, rock me. Oh, rock me, mama, like the wind and the rain. Rock me, mama, like a southbound train. Hey, mama, rock me.
Another live version of Wagon Wheel to close out our show. That's Old Crow Medicine Show playing it live at Bonnaroo in 2005, but not from their stage performance. Thanks to Zach Altheimer for that audio, which was from Bonnaroo's hay bale sessions. The hay bale sessions were in these studio trailers, which were surrounded by hay bales as soundproofing, and some of the artists would play sets and give interviews to Bonnaroo's media partners. I got to see Old Crow do this in 2007, but they didn't play Wagon Wheel that time. This is Southern Songs and Stories, the music of the South, and the artists who make it.
Hey, mama, rock me.
Okay, so were you around when Hillary Clinton was campaigning? I guess it wasn't really her coming to Asheville, but Tim Kaine came to Asheville a couple years ago and did a fundraising performance with Nikki Talley in Asheville. Do you remember that?
I do remember it. I was not in attendance, though, but I do remember that.
And you know what Tim Kaine wanted to play?
Yeah. That's just not reading the room well.